How does a data center solutions provider increase awareness? That's a great one. Because we now live in a world that's more globally connected than ever before. And we also live in a world that's driven more by self-propelled buyers' journeys than ever before. If I was hosting this live stream event a decade or so ago, if I was answering this question 10 years or so ago, we would have talked about the buyer's journey. And specifically, the buyer's journey is the active research process that one of your ideal prospects or clients goes through in between when they first discover that they have a goal or a challenge or a need or a stress that they're trying to deal with, and when they actually make a purchase decision. And about 10 years ago, most buyers spent about half of the buyer's journey with your sales team, meaning they got to roughly the halfway point before they were open to a sales conversation, which still left plenty of time for your sales team to do diagnostics and exploratory and better understand what they were truly looking for and help to frame the criteria that they use to evaluate all the other options. At the time, the prevailing data, the prevailing research was often cited from CEB, the Corporate Executive Board, that's now part of Gartner. And at that time, 56%, and this research was also co-sponsored with Sirius Decisions and Salesforce, so pretty widely accepted. 56% of a typical journey was over before vendor contact, before sales contact. Those days are long, long gone. Over the course of the last 10 years, as more baby boomers have retired, and they've been replaced by even more digitally leaning Gen Xers and millennials and Gen Z, we've ended up with a much more self-propelled buyer's journey. In addition to those demographic factors, think about the first 2 years of the 2020s, when nearly everyone was working from home, which also accelerated digital transformation. So that 56% number, where roughly half of the buyer's journey was over before sales contact, is now very much in our rearview mirror. And the prevailing number today, the prevailing consensus is that about 83% of a typical buyer's journey is over before sales contact or vendor contact. In other words, your prospects, your clients, your future sources of business really don't want to spend much time with your sales team anymore until they're almost ready to purchase. What are they doing before that? They're doing tons of research and comparing options and evaluating pricing on their own. They're going to search engines, they're going to their AI assistants, they're asking questions on social media, they're posting questions to their peers and looking for feedback. They're watching webinars and live streams just like this. They're listening to podcasts. They're going to review websites. In other words, they're going everywhere possible to avoid having to spend time with members of your sales team. This sales allergy is a very, very real thing. And this isn't just edge cases. This isn't just outliers. McKinsey found that like 70 to 80% of B2B buyers now prefer a digital journey. So with all of that in mind, how does a data center solutions provider increase awareness? It comes down to understanding what exactly it is that your company does. What's on your current product and services pages on your website? What's on your product roadmap of what you plan to be providing 6 months, 12 months, maybe at the absolute most 18 months out from now? And with that in mind, who are your ideal clients? When I look at the case study section on your website, can I find commonalities? When I look at your reviews, when I look at your testimonials, can I find the common ground? And with that in mind, you should be able to back into documenting a simple one-page ideal client profile, ICP, as it's often abbreviated. And on that ICP, we're going to document for our ideal client for a data center solutions provider, where are they located? What's the geographic components of all this? Can your company truly sell globally? Can you sell to an entire continent? Or can you just sell to a specific country or a region of a certain country? It's incredibly important when you're looking to build brand awareness that you're hyper specific about the location where you're looking to build brand awareness. Because at the absolute minimum, if you're selling globally, there's potentially dozens of different languages that you'll need to create brand awareness for. Even if you're just selling to English-speaking nations, for example, there may be a lot of localization and cultural issues that come up in building your brand awareness and building your go-to-market plan. In your ideal client profile, we also need to be realistic about the company sizes that are a really good fit for you to build brand awareness as a data center solution provider. In other words, I think like Goldilocks, not too hot, not too cold. It's the same thing. What company size is too large to be a good fit for your company to sell products and services as a data center solution provider? And what kind of company is too small? In other words, at the upper end of the range, what company is much more likely to do what you do in-house and not have a need for a data center solution provider? And what size company is so small that they just simply wouldn't have the resources to be able to afford your minimum level of engagement? With that in mind, you should be able to come up with a band, a range of the smallest size to the largest size. And people in and around the data center industry are wired innately to think about megawatts and now gigawatts, as well as square footage and density. And those are all important. But when it comes to targeting for brand awareness, at some point, you're going to have to convert this into a company size by revenue or by number of employees. The number of employees becomes a lot more straightforward and more actionable, just simply because LinkedIn, the most popular B2B professional networking on the platform on the planet, where likely most of your buyer personas spend a significant amount of their time. LinkedIn is wired to bracket everything by number of employees, like, for example, 1 to 10 employees, 11 to 50, 51 to 200, et cetera. So once you have that in mind, it helps with your filters. It helps with your queries if you're using LinkedIn Sales Navigator. It helps with your ad strategy if you're running LinkedIn Campaign Manager. So normalizing by number of employees by head counts is also incredibly important for your ideal client profile. And then in addition to the geographic factors, in addition to the company size factors, think about if there's certain business models, if there are certain industries that are a better fit than others for what you provide as a data center solutions provider. And this becomes especially relevant because we know in certain geographic regions of the world, certain regulatory requirements kick in depending on the nature of the industry, depending on the nature of the vertical business model. Like the most well-known ones, for example, would be around healthcare or financial services, but there's certainly other cases where your ability to meet compliance requirements and certification requirements definitely becomes a factor in how you are looking to build a brand awareness as part of your ideal client profile. So now that we have the company in mind, as your ICP is documented, as your ideal client profile is documented, we can set about building a target account list of a couple dozen, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand companies that fit that really well, that we need to build a brand awareness within. Then within those companies, we need to know who are the most important kinds of stakeholders that we need to build brand awareness with, that we need to educate and build trust with. And depending on the nature of what you do, this could be CTOs, this could be facilities directors, it could be real estate directors. And again, the roles will depend on the nature of what it is that you actually provide at the intersection of their company size. Why is their company size so important with the buyer personas? Because we know in smaller companies, people tend to wear a lot of hats. They take on a lot of different roles that in larger companies could be split up among multiple different job functions, even multiple different teams. But at the end of the day, to be effective with building brand awareness as a data center solutions provider, we not only need to know the company that we're targeting, we need to know the kind of stakeholder that we're targeting. And your most important stakeholder that you need to build brand awareness with, we're going to call your primary buyer persona. The second most important one, we'll call your secondary buyer persona. There may even be a third most important one, like a tertiary buyer persona. And over time, you may encounter negative buyer personas. This could be detractors, people that aren't big fans of what you do, or stakeholders that when you come across, in that particular company, that's going to be the kiss of death for being able to do business with that company, because it's just an instant disqualifier. So that would be a negative buyer persona. And all of these become incredibly important for how you build your website navigation, how you target paid search, how you target paid social, what goes on the drop-down lists on your forms, the filters that your sales team uses from a sales enablement perspective and deals board perspective, and a host of other factors. But we need to directionally make sure that we're hyper focused, that we're super clear about the kinds of companies and the kinds of stakeholders within those companies where we need to build brand awareness. Once we have that in mind, we'll go and do the research, the customer insight research, and actually do actual real live research on these buyer personas, so we know their biggest goals, their biggest challenges, where they hang out online and offline, what they desire most, what's keeping them up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Once we've answered those 5, 6, 7 most important questions for our first kinds, primary and a secondary buyer personas, then we go about creating a content calendar, an events calendar, and we need to educate and build trust as if the future survival of our company depends on us educating and building trust with our most important and second most important buyer personas. That's the key to building brand awareness. What I would caution you to keep in mind is the definition of brand. Just like the buyer's journey has changed tremendously over the past 10 years, the definition of building a brand and brand awareness has changed quite drastically over the last 10 years. And in a world where you're not involved, your sales team is probably not going to be invited in very often onto the prospect or client side of the table unless they show up as a consultant, a teacher, a trusted advisor, or a subject matter expert. It becomes incredibly important to remember that your brand now, your building brand awareness, is about so much more than aesthetic factors or what would have been the domain of your creative director many years ago. It's about so much more than just the hexadecimal codes for your colors and the fonts and the logos and the trade dress. Your brand is now everything that the marketplace says about your company and your team when you are not in the room. And given that you're hardly in the room anymore for nearly all of the buyer's journey, it is incredibly important for us to get your client-facing team in as early as possible and as often as possible as trusted advisors, as teachers, as consultants, and subject matter experts. If they're just showing up, badgering prospects to book a meeting, not going to cut it anymore. No one needs your sales team to read the website to them anymore. What they do need is they do need to feel that your team brings expert insight about how other stakeholders in similar companies have tackled these problems. So to the extent they're able to provide that, they'll be welcomed in. Your prospects and clients will want to meet with them. To the extent they're not doing that, they're going to hear a lot of crickets. So really the choice is yours. But at the end of the day, if you are in a leadership role with a data center solutions provider and you're trying to increase and build your awareness, these are all really, really important factors to be thinking through for now and in the coming months and in the coming years.